countermeasures against jihadist content have to be systemic. They have to be conducted by the platforms, by the authorities, by the military, and even by the society.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Terror Takedown podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Rothut, a researcher at LMU Munich. Today, we're diving into the intricate world of jihadist communication, examining its evolution, current trends, and the role of online communities in radicalisation and recruitment. We will also discuss effective countermeasures and provide tips for smaller platforms struggling with these challenges. We are privileged to have with us today Laurence Bindner, an expert in the dissemination of jihadist content online, jihadist propaganda and rhetoric. Laurence's expertise extends to terrorism financing and the links between illicit trade and jihadist networks in France and the European Union. She is the co-founder of the JOS project, which monitors jihadist activity across the web and social media, a member of the Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate Global Research Network of the United Nations, and the former Director of Development of the Center for the Analysis of Terrorism in Paris. Laurence, let's start by discussing how jihadist communication has evolved over time, specifically with the shift from offline to online. How has the digital transformation impacted their strategies and outreach?
So first, I think that we have to remind that controlling communication is crucial for jihadist groups. They are in the fight of the weak against the strong, and they are fighting an asymmetric warfare against an enemy that is more powerful. And therefore, it is crucial for them to compensate the weakness on the ground by a strong communication capability. And now, to assess the weight of jihadist propaganda today on social media, we indeed have to go all the way back to understand how their communication evolved over time and highlight the most important turning points. So the first turning point was, of course, the advent of the internet, and then that of the participative internet and how communication has become more and more horizontal and decentralized until now. So jihadist groups, actually Al-Qaeda, since Al-Qaeda was in a monopoly at the time, immediately understood that the internet was an opportunity. It was an opportunity in terms of costs, in terms of scale, in terms of reach of the audience, and because of the instant distribution of a message. But most of all, internet would also enable a direct communication with the target audience and the possibility to get rid of the intermediary media and gatekeepers. And so the internet would enable to have control over the entire communication chain, from the production to the distribution and then to the consumption of this propaganda. And so the first jihadist websites emerged at the end of the 90s, and the first sites of Al-Qaeda in the year 2000. Then the US authorities started to target those sites, and it's at that time that we started to see emerge mirror websites with duplicated content, showing that the jihadists already displayed a resilience regarding their online activities. It is also at the time that the first forums emerge with functionalities enabling a more multilateral communication and a more horizontal pattern. And the group with these forums were then able to have a much more direct and more interactive communication with their audience. I just want to highlight something that is also quite interesting. It is that the participative web did emerge at the same time as two phenomena. The first phenomenon was the geographical decentralization of Al-Qaeda with the creation of subsidiaries, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in 2004, Al-Shabaab in Somalia 2006, AKIM in the Maghreb in 2007, ACAP in Yemen, Jenim in Mali, AKIS in the Indian subcontinent, etc. And with these new branches were created dedicated media foundations, fostering the communication decentralization of the group. And the second phenomenon is the evolution of the paradigm within the jihadist ecosystem with the concept of the leaderless jihad and the will to empower small cells to carry out attacks, especially in the West. And so those two elements of decentralization were concomitant with the decentralization and horizontalization of the communication. And so all this leads us to the use of social media by jihadists. And we have to say that at the beginning, jihadists were quite reluctant to use social media. They were hosted in the US, which fueled mistrust. But at the beginning of the Syrian conflict and the massive arrivals of young people from Europe and from the Maghreb, they imported the use of social media. And it is at that time that social media started to become the main communication means for ISIS in particular. But then social media started to intervene, to delete accounts, pages, groups, publications. That intervention started to take place in 2016, a little bit after the Paris attack of 2015. And it is at that time that jihadist groups, ISIS in the first place, moved towards encrypted messaging applications such as Telegram as a fallback solution. It has further decentralized since then, in particular after the Europol operation against Telegram in November 2019. And since then and currently, jihadist propaganda come from a very large variety of platforms in order to diversify the risk of deletion. It comes from social media, from forums, from file sharing platforms, actually a huge range of them, from encrypted messaging apps still, and from decentralized applications. So we see that they use the web as a very in a very systemic capacity.
The internet is an extremely dynamic environment where trends can change from one week to the other. What trends and techniques do you currently observe?
So the question of the adaptability of jihadist groups and individuals is very interesting. Actually, they have a dilemma. They migrated to more secure and more confidential platforms, but also had to maintain a foothold in mainstream social media to remain in contact with a broader audience. And so to do so, they actually set up a range of evolving tactics that are quite comparable to guerrilla tactics that these groups rely on in the real life and on the ground. So I will provide here a few examples of techniques that we are currently observing. It's just a sample. There are many more, but first of all, we see that, like in the real life, they move and hide towards new safe places, like, for instance, they did with Telegram. Second, they play on volume. When a new release is published, it's uploaded to a large range of file-sharing platforms, making the work of the authorities much more difficult to spot every one of them and to delete every one of them. So there is a sort of strategy to overwhelm the authority with a volume of links and of uploads. The third tactic is that they publish transient content using functionalities that allow a content to be rapidly erased, for instance, ephemeral stories, and to avoid being detected. One of the tactics is that they camouflage themselves or they camouflage their content. For instance, by modifying the colors of an image to avoid being spotted by the system, or by sharing elusive content that's only recognized by those who are already in their spheres and that is not recognized by others or by the system. And also, last but not least, they use new technologies. For instance, they use AI, they started to use deepfakes. An interesting attempt took place after the Crocus Hall attack in Moscow in March, with the release in the ISIS sphere of a video featuring a fake journalist declaiming the text of the claim. They also use generative AI to create posters and a large variety of posters that can actually compensate the decrease in terms of production, because it's very easy to create a content with generative AI. So those are just examples of those tactics, but there are actually many others.
While extremist and terrorist content often is intended to intimidate the public, some sorts of their online propaganda certainly aim at activating purposes such as recruiting new members. Social media can, in that course, function as an environment where susceptible individuals get to know like-minded. What do you observe regarding the role of communities, or more specifically, what role do community and group processes play in Islamist radicalisation and recruitment?
So, yes, it's totally correct to assert that online propaganda also has operational aims, such as fundraising, and most of all, nurturing a community spirit. There is a very interesting survey that was released in 2022, conducted by French researchers Xavier Chrétier and Romain Seize for the direction of the French prison administration. A survey on 353 imprisoned jihadist individuals. And in particular, the study focused on how they socialized during their radicalization process. And the findings are extremely interesting, since they conclude that the first medium of socialization among them was the digital socialization, ahead of friendship links, family links, and so on. And this confirms that online communities are extremely important to observe and to monitor. A few minutes ago, I was referring to the elusive posting. This elusive posting and this elusive content, in addition to the aim to circumvent the platform's software and avoid being detected, is also a way to create a spirit of community, some common references that only like-minded people understand. And this clearly strengthens the feeling of belonging of these individuals, to belonging to a group, to a vanguard, and to an elite, actually. And so, yes, the online environment is now key in the jihadist sphere, and also in the right-wing extremist sphere.
Be it content aimed at intimidating the public or content aimed at mobilizing sympathizers, what are the most effective countermeasures currently in use against radical Islamist and jihadist online communication?
Well, I would say that, as in the real life, fighting against jihadist online activities has to have three components. A preventive component, with the development of, for instance, alternative messaging, for instance, with positive messaging regarding the West, the integration of Muslims in the West, success stories, and so on. The first component is a repressive component, as in the real life, which means deletion of groups, content, pages, accounts, to keep pressuring these groups and trying to make content as inaccessible as possible for the public. And I would say that there is also another component, which is an intel component, the gathering of information to disrupt cells. And we have to keep in mind that digital activities are also digital evidences for the authorities. And so one has to be able to find them, to process them, and so on. So following jihadist activities online for the authorities is also a way to disrupt these networks. And actually, countermeasures against jihadist content have to be systemic. They have to be conducted by the platforms, by the authorities, by the military, by, for instance, targeting media operatives to disrupt some publication process, and even by the society in reporting egregious content to the platform, to the authorities, and so on. So it's really a systemic approach that we have to carry out in that fight.
Last but not least, we all know how important it is to counter extremist and terrorist content online. Still, it may be particularly challenging for smaller platforms that maybe lack resources to address that issue. Do you have tips for small platforms in specific?
So indeed, it's more challenging for smaller platforms to carry out this fight, but the tools against this propaganda are now quite available. And so my first advice to them would be, first of all, to be aware of the existence of jihadist propaganda and of the will of jihadist groups to disseminate widely, and to be aware of the potential contamination of their platform. The second advice would be to react fast when an illegal content is spotted. The first reaction after the first contamination will be crucial, because if one platform takes time to react, jihadists will think that their moderation is weak, and they will upload more content, create more accounts, and it will be more difficult to get rid of them. It's a vicious circle. My third advice is to anticipate. It's a consequence of the need to react fast. So it's to anticipate. Don't be taken by surprise. Take contact with stakeholders that are involved in that fight. Even if today one platform is not yet contaminated, we have to be aware that the zero risk doesn't exist. And last but not least, my last advice would be to share views with other platforms, with colleagues, to share experience, to communicate with them, and to regularly participate in conferences, webinars, to keep being informed, because the trends are evolving very fast in that environment, and malicious actors are also adapting very fast to hostile environments. So we have to keep the pace.
Laurence, thank you so much for sharing your valuable expertise with us today. Your insights into the evolution of jihadist communication, the role of online communities, and the effects of countermeasures being implemented certainly provide us with a deeper understanding of this critical issue. Your practical advice for smaller platforms is so important, which is why I would like to echo that. As Laurence said, make sure to be aware that there is no zero risk. React fast, get involved with stakeholders that provide support, and stay engaged with this topic to stay informed. The fact that you follow this podcast until now is already a great sign. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to join us in our next episode for more discussions on current trends in violent extremist and terrorist online communication and on how we can tackle these complex challenges together. Until then, stay vigilant and stay safe. Goodbye.